Hey everyone, welcome back to the Revolution of Being podcast. Today we are talking about one of my favorite topics, which is victimhood, consciousness, and the power of choice. So, just before we hopped on recording today, Jess and I were talking about some of our favorite books relating to consciousness. And if you're on this page, you've probably heard of David Hawkins. So, he has a really awesome book. And I believe, Jess, what's his first book? There's Power versus Force. And then is the other one The Map of Consciousness? He's a spiritual teacher. So he's got, in all of his books, he talks about different scales of consciousness. The one that's coming to mind was the first one I read, which is Power versus Force. And why that's relevant is he actually has a scale in his book that talks about different levels of consciousness, meaning, you can be in fear and in victimhood. You can be all the way up to Christ consciousness, right? Which is like of the great sages of our time, Jesus Christ, Buddha, and whatnot. But then there's a giant scale between with which humanity operates, right? And so I bring this up because it's going to be really pertinent to our discussion about the power of choice, about victimhood, about being able to really take control of our lives. But also, I think what is neat about it is that it offers a lens of compassion, right? Because so often, it can be like, why don't people understand what's happening in this world? Or why are people fighting and groveling and just at each other's throats with this black and white and left and right and all these things? And it really comes down to the level of consciousness with which people are at. And so before I kind of jump into all the scales and everything, I want to just check in with you, Jess, because I know this is something we just love to talk about and there's a lot of different directions we can go. So I want to stay focused here on this topic, but go ahead.
Okay, well, the other book is Letting Go.
Mhm.
I had to look it up because I couldn't remember. Really good book as well. He's a great author. Um, yeah, okay, so staying on topic, this is a really big deal. And the reason that this conversation is a really big deal, because this is where all your power lives, every last bit of it. Now, I'd like to preface that by saying we all have been living in a world that wants us and taught us and reinforced the idea that things happen to us and we are the victim of society, or we are the victim of all these things. And it promoted that idea so strongly that it created, I'm going to just say it, Angie, do-gooders that do no good. It created programs and things that were meant to pull on the empathy of good people, but it had not good intentions on the backside of it. The underbelly of it was pretty nasty, but it reinforced this idea that we have people that get and people that don't.
Mhm.
Instead of promoting this idea that we all sit in the driver's seat, we all have cards that were dealt to us, and we all have the opportunity to work with whatever the hand is to our advantage. And that's not to say that people haven't been victimized. I have absolutely been victimized. You have been victimized. Many people are victimized. But here's where that choice comes in and what you're speaking to most importantly. You have the choice to remain a victim or not. Only you are accountable to heal, resolve, transform. Only you. There is nobody coming to save you. And we've talked about that so many times. That is that level of accountability that is so beyond comprehension because we again have been conditioned to believe that we are victims based on our skin color, maybe based on our sex, based on our sexual preference, based on whatever it is, even your religion. Christians believe that if you're Hindu, you're damned to hell. A Hindu person could be like, well, it's what I do, so I guess I just go to hell. It's not like that. And the first step is seeing that for what it is.
Yeah. And people are waking up to that. And I think that's the cool thing is, for so long, a lot of us, and myself included, existed in that victim consciousness of life is happening to me. I don't have a choice. And that was really very prominent for me into, gosh, 2019, 20, was really when I started to wake up to there's a different way. Now, you and I were talking before the call too. I remember in 2016, I was not at a space of awakening that I am today. And I remember waking up to the election results that, Trump had won. And at that point, I was just kind of like, oh gosh, what's going to happen? But I remember even back then being like, well, we'll just see. This could be better than I expect. Right. And my mindset in terms of politics was in a different space, meaning, I was a little bit more left leaning at that point, um, and not that it matters, neither here nor there. I'm a very different person at this point. But even back then, I was like, well, we're just going to see what happens, right? Versus this angry protest of like, it's all going to be bad because what choice do I have, right? Like, I can choose to be open to this could be a good opportunity for our country or grovel in the fact that life's going to forever suck and all these things. And I mean, to what I recall, it wasn't a bad time. Like, I felt fine. Everything was decent in my life. And that's the reality of it. Like, I didn't allow any of the politics to dictate too much of my daily experience because really, like, I was a mom, I'm a nurse, I've got all these things going on. Like, I don't have time to be pissy in all these different things that don't directly affect my exact experience. And that was something my first coach said to me, who I worked with, 2020 or 2021. And it was really this, does it pertain to you? Does a certain person being in office pertain directly to you? Well, yeah, of course, because the tax structure, okay, but does it really affect your daily life? And I tried so hard to argue for limitations. Now, this wasn't about politics. What he was challenging me on was some relationship dynamics. But the point is, does all this stuff really pertain to you, and how much does it truly affect your daily experience? Or are you allow making it make you suffer or allowing it to create suffering for you? And that was a really big tipping point of like, because I had the openness, right? I paid this person thousands of dollars to coach me. So I was very willing to hear a different perspective because I had hit a rock bottom in my life. And when he began to challenge, a lot of the experiences in my life, I initially did what I used to do, which is shut down and get angry. And then I thought about that. And then I realized that's how I show up when I get frustrated and angry. That's not helpful. That's not allowing me to grow, move through it, whatever. And I came back with a fresh set of eyes to like, well, yeah, I guess when it comes down to it, like everything is a choice, always. I can choose how I show up. I can choose the job I have or don't have. I can choose how I parent my kids. I can choose the fact that I'm wearing sweatpants that you can't see beneath this nice shirt today. Like there's choice in everything. And so this idea that you said is like we've been really conditioned societally to be victims, and there are so many organizations that exist out there that have good intention but continue to victimize people. And this is controversial, but even the welfare system, right, is a system that was intended to help people who are having a hard time in life. But what it's turned into is a system that keeps people stuck in a system because if they get off it, life is going to be harder. You start to lose all these benefits to make minimum wage. That's not sustainable for a lot of people who have young kids. So there's a system that keeps them trapped, that keeps them believing that this is the only way. And the way out of it is really to kind of begin to see through the illusion. And that's not to say, like, I am a firm believer in a lot of social programs that do good for people as you're having a hard time, we're going to help you right now. And then when that time's over, back to business as usual. But that's not what we've created in the society. And we've really perpetuated this idea that because, we're born a certain sex or we're, a certain color skin or male or female, that there's some kind of disadvantage. And while we can say historically things have happened that are not fair to different people, absolutely not going to deny that, we can also acknowledge that in every opportunity, we do have choice as humans with which how to see that. And I think the biggest example that I've mentioned before is Viktor Frankl's book, A Man's Search for Meaning. That man was victimized to, a degree I can't even fathom, being thrown in concentration camps. And he chose every day to show up as a loving person in such a horrific experience where you begin to see the depths and darkness of humanity and people who are just doing whatever they can to survive, and it's an interesting book. So if you get a chance to read it, it's fantastic. But where this kind of comes to, bring it back to the original discussion is, again, I really like David Hawkins' books. So if you're someone who likes spiritual teachings or just books that kind of make you think about how to be different and show up differently, David Hawkins' books are a fantastic start. My favorite book of all time thus far is Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender, which is just an absolute fantastic book on how to begin to change your mindset around the traumas, the illness, the different things you have. And it's something that I recommend to every single client of mine because it really is such a powerful book. And it tells you how to shift your mind when you're dealing with struggles. And that's a hard thing, is well, just shift your attention, just change your mindset. Well, he actually tells you how to do that. And I love that. It's such a practical, like hands-on, how to reframe your thinking. So in his book, he talks about the levels of consciousness. And why this is pertinent is because victimhood falls in there. So he has a scale of 0 to 1,000. 0 is basically you're dead, right? You don't have consciousness, you're not here. 1,000 is Christ consciousness. But as I mentioned, there's a huge span in between with which people operate. And the majority of people, so again, 0 to 1,000, the majority of people are really operating in a lower level of consciousness, which is this, what he deems as force. We use force to get by. These are the wars. These are the taking over of governments. These are the acts of violence that we use to keep power in certain hands. And that's the majority of, I think the book referenced 85 or 90% of people exist within the frequency of 200 or below, which if you look around, that makes a lot of sense. And so it's not until you hit that scale of 200, which you begin to have that courage. So the scale of 200 relates to courage, that I can do it. Okay, I can do it. I have the power to begin changing. I can make a little bit of a difference in my life. And this is really the phase where you can begin to tap into personal growth. And you're just like, okay, I don't have to be stuck in a job I hate the rest of my life. I do have some choices. Maybe I'll go back to school. Maybe I'll look at different jobs. Yeah, I know I've got great benefits here, but maybe there's something better for me. And that's when we can kind of just begin to think about a different possibility. Now, beneath that scale, under 200, that's not even an option. You are in full-fledged victimhood. There are no options available to you. Life is happening to you, not for you. And it's really at 200 where that begins to shift. Now, you start to get into this point a little higher in the scales of consciousness, which is the scale of 400, which is where, according to his book, only about 4% of the population exists, which blows my mind. But it really makes sense, again, with what we see out there. I'm like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Now, that is when you begin to start having that ability to reason and say, okay, it's kind of what I would relate to breaking out of the matrix. The veil is lifting and you're beginning to see things for what they are, but also critically think. And now I know a ton of people would say, well, there's so many educated people out here. There's so many people who, studied science better than you and blah, 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 blah. And you think that they don't know how to critically think? No, they don't. Not all of them. And here's why. The school systems never taught us how to critically think. And that's by design, really. That goes back to the Rockefeller, bringing in education to create this sea of worker bees. We don't want you questioning the system. We just want you to go learn, regurgitate, and then go out in the world and make us some money. And that's really that scale. And so when you start to critically think, that means examining, the studies that are funded by the people they benefit. That means beginning to question the sick care system and say, well, why would I spend all this money to get a bandage fix for a problem that's not even root cause? Why would I have my kids go to school to just memorize a bunch of stuff from textbooks and then regurgitate it on a test as an indication of their intelligence? What? So you begin to kind of question that. And that's not to say, this is not conspiratorial talk. This is beginning to just question the things you've been taught. And that's a mind fuck for a lot of people because you start to see how much everything we've lived in is an illusion. And that also begins to, it's kind of funny because I think of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. When I woke up, I was in anger because I was the whole time, all of this has been happening and I had no idea. And I went through the grief and all these different phases of bargaining. Is it real? Am I crazy? And then acceptance of yeah, this is the matrix. All right, let's learn to play the game. And I remember my brother telling me that a few years ago. I was just how do you exist in this system knowing everything you know without being so angry and frustrated? He's like, Ange, you just got to learn to play the game. That's it. And I was like, fuck yes, I'm going to be the best game player I can, knowing what I know now, knowing this is all an illusion, that this is set up to keep us down. Like, I'm going to play the game as well as I can. And, and outwit the devil, which we'll get into that book in a little bit, right? Begin to outwit the systems that have tried to keep us suppressed. And so, when you kind of come into that consciousness, and it's something that not everybody is willing to get to or want to get to, and that's okay. And this is not someone's better than another because of their development or any of that. I just want to be clear. This is not going to be an ego game of higher than thou. It is a testament, though, to our devotion to personal growth and our devotion continually to always challenging our own beliefs. And that's something that you and I talk about all the time is, what I believe today is vastly different than what I believed a year ago. And what I believe next year, I'm sure is going to be very different than what I hold true today, because I'm always willing to say could be completely wrong about everything I think. And please challenge me if you have contradictory information. Please do bring that to my attention. Now, where people get stuck is that the majority of people will go into fight flight. Like, this is a literal brain chemistry thing where when your beliefs are challenged, it is as threatening as being chased by a tiger, and your critical thinking shuts down and you literally can't see outside of that. So if we think about the fact that 96% of the people in our population exist like that, now where their beliefs are threatened and they go into survival mode, how do we move forward, right? Like, it's really hard to move forward when people immediately go into that response. And that's not a conscious response. Nobody's doing this because they're being difficult. This is literally an innate survival response for people. And, you can't wake anybody up either, so that's where the continual posting on Facebook or on social media, arguing your side of politics will never, ever, ever make a difference to those who are unwilling to see or hear it. And just like you and I, like, I don't push my beliefs on anybody. I'll have discussions, but I'm not going to assume I'm right and I'm not going to assume you're wrong, because we're all still learning and growing. Do I have opinions? Of course, and I think that's human. To say that we exist in complete neutrality, I think is a fallacy. Like, we are human by nature, and to be human, we have our biases and we have our things. And, I don't think that I will reach the level of Christ consciousness this lifetime. But if I do, that might be a point where I will live in, true neutrality. But the majority of us is not where we play. So anyways, that's a long conversation, but I wanted to just kind of encapsulate. I really encourage you guys to check out, or even like ChatGPT, David Hawkins' Scale of Consciousness, because it gives you a really nice synopsis of the different levels. And you might see where you exist within that. It's really interesting because we can waver between the different levels too, depending on the day. Like, we're not always going to exist in a frequency of love. Like, we're going to be wavering in different times of our life. But the more we kind of ascend these different levels of consciousness, the more we can ground them. And that does become our new normal. So
Right.
anyway.
Yeah. You know, I like what Mel Robbins said. She said, you're the only person you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life. So let that be maybe a motivator for you, because I think we torture ourselves when we gaslight ourselves into believing something is the way it is, and we become our own worst enemy, and we believe that we're stuck, and we believe that, this is true when it might not be. Question the things that make you afraid. Question those things, because usually the reward for questioning it lays on the other side of the discomfort of, what if I am wrong? What happens then? It's all the unknown. So my son and I were talking about this, and I want to talk about Outwitting the Devil just a little bit. If you haven't read the book, it's one I read back in 2015 or so. Fantastic book. But my son and I were talking about how, to echo what you said, such a small portion of people are really truly in a place of, I guess you could call it self-awareness, right? That he said it's kind of like these grooves get put into our brain, like train tracks. And the more that we run the same program over and over, the deeper they get. And so pretty soon you're really buried in the patterns that you operate in day after day after day. And this is where people, I think, are just unconsciously living. They do the same thing. They wake up to the same alarm. same sound, same time. They stumble into the kitchen. They make the same cup of coffee. They turn the news on. They get their dose of daily programming, and they go in the shower and they run the same pattern. They drive the same route. They go to the same job. And somewhere in the background, they're like not really feeling alive, but that's what they do. And they do it for the reasons you said, like benefits are really good, or, I need the money. What do I do? Like I have to pay my bills. Those are legitimate, valid fears. But the problem is we just have the grooves so deep, and it is so scary to get off of the track. Some people don't even know where to start. But here's what life will do and why it's good to practice. Because the whole time you do have a choice. First step is acknowledging it. I do have a choice in this. I don't have to do this. It doesn't mean my other options look appealing, but I do have a choice. But sometimes, I think they say every 18 months or so, you have a crisis. Every human being has, on average, a crisis every 18 months or so. Your life could all just get turned upside down involuntarily, and you will be in a position where you have to choose because the groove is gone, whatever that means. So it's good to practice it ahead of time. Now, all that said, the book I read in 2015 is called Outwitting the Devil. It's by Napoleon Hill. It was a very serendipitous mentioning of it that made me read it. And I went and bought the book right away because I'm like, this sounds fascinating. It sounds like I have to read it. So if our audience is familiar with Napoleon Hill, he was here 100 years ago. It's been a very long time. He wrote this book, I want to say it was late 20s, early 30s. So just really think about that time frame. We were coming out of the Prohibition. Our Federal Reserve just got established in 1913. We were between world wars. There was all this stuff, the Roaring 20s. Napoleon Hill's story is fascinating. He went from somebody to absolutely nobody and climbed his way back up to being somebody. So talk about somebody who is very disadvantaged. So this book, it starts off kind of slow because it tells you a little bit about his previous history up to the point that the book really starts. And in this book, he is driving through Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, and he ends up in a parking spot at the Lincoln Memorial, which is pretty interesting because if you've ever been to DC, it's a very interesting building. I've been through the Lincoln Memorial before. So he's parked in front of the Lincoln Memorial, and he feels compelled to engage in a conversation with the devil, of all things. And this whole rest of this book is a dialogue. It's a Q&A. It's everything he asked him. And if you have any kind of like concept of what the devil is, I'm gonna spoil this for you. It's really not the image that society has portrayed it. According to Napoleon Hill's book, it's just the negative side of everything. It really is the dark and the light. So he engages in this conversation, asks him a lot of questions. And again, not surprising that a lot of the questions were stemmed around like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? The objective, according to the devil in the book, was to control the minds of society, of the people in the world. And the shocking thing is that, based on what you just said about the number of people that are actually really online, like living consciously, I think you said it's like 4%, right? In the book Outwitting the Devil says that 98% of the population has their mind already controlled. They are already controlled. That means 2% of human beings at that time, in the 20s, 30s, 2% of human beings were free thinkers. Now there's probably been a change to that. I think that what we're witnessing, what we're living through is, I don't think anybody can argue that there's an awakening. I think on every side of the scale, left, right, I think there's awakenings happening. But to what you said, I think the other half of that is something we talked about before we went on this, is that even in like the most ancient texts, it talks about how wisdom, knowledge alone is not enough. And we have a very quote unquote educated society. Like that came into play when I was young, like go to college, do this. It's the Rockefeller diagram all day long. But the other side of the equation is the connection to our soul, our spirit, our essence, our creator. And it's within us. And so if we don't have access to both the knowledge and that, we are operating only in our ego. We are only operating with the ego system, which will always bypass any kind of spiritual discernment, intuition, moral alignment. That's where, we get the phrase, it's for the greater good. That's where mass genocides happen because we're just thinking our way through all these problems. So you have to see things from that kind of viewpoint to begin to go, okay, I see the reality of it. And now what do I do with that? That's what the choice really boils down to. Because if you're not leveling yourself up, you're going to level out and you're going to stay stuck. That's where people get stuck. They just level out. They stop trying to figure out if there's another answer. They stop trying to figure out if there's something more about them. They just remain in this stuckness. And they claim they're stuck. But you know what? They're just scared to be unstuck. So they're choosing the stuck. Because everything I just said, everything you just said, that blows people's mind. That's scary to some people. For you and I, we get excited. We're like, yes, more of that, please. Let's see what else there is. But for a lot of people, that's terrifying because they're so running on the program. Their grooves are so deep that it's just, nope, I get up, I go to work. I don't love what I do, but I have my 401k and I'm saving up and, someday I'm going to retire. And then what? Die? Miserable that you spent your whole life not choosing yourself? Because again, you're the only person you have to spend the rest of your life with.
It's brain shattering to think the entire paradigm with which you've lived is an illusion, right? And I think that is where the majority of people don't even want to question, because what if everything I learned was wrong? Again, brings up the trigger of feeling like you're going to die. Your brain goes into survival mode then and just starts to just frantically search for something it knows and understands. And that's what we do when we're babies, right? We're just learning about the world. We're fresh, being newly conditioned, kind of newly hypnotized, brainwashed, whatever you want to say, to how things are. And to begin to undo how things are is providing significant cognitive dissonance with people. They just can't even wrap their mind around it. And even to the point of that spiritual, having a spiritual foundation. I'm going to just say, I know a lot of spiritual people who are not loving, kind people and who get very much an ego. And that goes to the dogmatic nature of religion. And that's not to say there aren't really good people who are of certain faiths, but it's to say that's a guiding light to get you to tune into the deeper truths of that. Even in the Bible, it says the kingdom of God is within. It's not out there, it's in here. You are God, you are of God consciousness. And that's what, I see a lot of people, well, I'm just praying to God. God, I got to do my daily prayers and I got to just ask him for help. And okay, yes, if that gives you a lot of peace of mind, that's beautiful, but you're also of God and it's here and it's understanding the unity, the collective consciousness that we are all one. And that's what I don't think, enough people fully yet understand is we can say that, but do you truly understand what that means? Which is where people are like, well, we need to go do something about the wars that are happening out east and all this. But we need to work on ourselves, really, because that's how the change is made. It's not that we're going to be out there being activists and protesting and creating change through that. That can help, but only after this work is done here. And that's where people really need to be tuning in to doing their own work and questioning everything. Is my intention for the betterment of my ego and to give me some kind of a pump of my self-esteem? Or is it a truly pure intention of helping people or understanding people, right? And you and I have said too, just with regards to even our own, prior religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs or, like political affiliations. I can understand why other people believe the way they do, and that's okay. And they have a right to based on their lived experience. That makes perfect sense why they have the thoughts they do. And also, we can also challenge our own thoughts and say maybe they're not totally accurate, right? Because thoughts are not necessarily ours. They're the program running in our brain, but that's not the truth of who we are. So when we let those thoughts kind of really just erode away at us, we're doing a lot of damage. Um, but again, I think the scales are tipping, so it's interesting because Napoleon Hill said 2%. David Hawkins is saying about 4%. I would venture to say, within the last 20, 30 years, maybe that's up to like 6% or more. I feel like I'm meeting people left and right who are beginning to question things. They're kind of beginning to have that like scale tipping mindset where then the floodgates open and you begin to understand things. And, but I will also say just because one person is awakened and another person is, they're going to have very different opinions and beliefs still. There's all different flavors of this journey. And again, none of it means that anybody is inherently right or wrong. It's a matter of where they are in the moment of their development, which
It's stages.
it is, and all of it's leading us to the higher elevation of love, that collective unity to a consciousness of love, that hey, in spite of the differences we all have, we are all one and I love you still. And that's really what, I think a lot of this is. And coming back to the victim consciousness, right? You can't be in love to that level of unconditional love if you're a victim or if you're truly believing the world is happening, because that's completely ego based. And so, yeah, if you get a chance, the Napoleon Hill, he actually, it's on YouTube as well. So that's what I did was I listened on YouTube to the book. So that's an easy way for anybody to access it quick. It's going to bend your mind and it's going to challenge a lot of beliefs. I've sent it to a few people who were not quite ready for it, which was interesting, and others who were like, "Oh my god, that was like, yes, that explains everything that I've come to understand in an even better way." And he was saying this 100 years ago, and it's like we are seeing history repeat in a lot of ways, but I think we are on the cusp of a paradigm shift, and I think that's because we have this mass awakening happening, and everything in the last, even more, the last 5 years has accelerated that. But, probably in the last like 10 to 20 has been a part of like the hastening of all these things happening for our greater good. And again, whether you love the current administration or hate it, all of this is happening for ascension, all of it. So, whatever opinions you have about it, good or bad, you think the guy's great, you don't care. I don't care what you think personally. Like, I honor your decisions and your opinions, but it's all happening for our ascension. It's all happening for our good. And part of that is that sometimes the things that happen for our ascension aren't inherently good, like, and I'm doing air quote good because it's also a perception. Is it good or bad? We perceive it. Like, so there's a lot we could go into that philosophically, but it is all happening to wake people up. And had COVID not happened, we wouldn't have had the bandage ripped off, like we did with the mass awakening that happened then. And we're in it now where a lot of people are kind of coming online and questioning things. And part of our purpose with this podcast too is to help people kind of understand what they're going through and understand there's no right or wrong way. But investing in your personal development, your spiritual growth is just one of the most powerful things you can do at this point. And I was talking with a good friend who is a very gifted seer and spiritual, you'd say like channeler, I suppose. And she was saying, we're really in this time where if you're not doing the inner work and you're reaching a level where you're just not ascending and you're tire spinning, those people are not going to be around very long, and discern for that what you will. but there's going to be a mass exodus of populations here that aren't doing the work. And that's, again, not to point fingers or shame or whatever, but moreover, like, you've reached your ascension level this lifetime, and there's not a whole lot more you're going to do. And so you might opt out and then come back and do it again when you're ready to evolve further. But we really are at this place where it's kind of like, all right, spiritual warriors, stand up. Like, time to be the face of leading this new chapter, and rebuilding a society that is very different. And that's scary. That's threatening people. People see what's happening right now as really scary dictator activity or other things. I'm not going to say what I think it is or isn't, because I'm just going to watch it unfold. However, change is necessary to evolution, and people don't like that. We know that in America. We don't like pain. We don't like discomfort. We want quick fixes. We want to Amazon Prime everything. We want to take Ozempic. We want to do all this shit to avoid actually having to do the work. But like labor and birth, it's not pretty. It can be gross and ugly and gory, but then the end result is the most beautiful transformation ever, and you have this beautiful little baby. That's what I believe we are in as a society, and it's not pretty. And people are, going to have opinions about that too, and that's fine. If you think this process can be easy, show me a time where someone ever did something worthwhile and it was easy.
Yeah,
Training for the
enabling
Olympics.
populations of people does not create a better population of people. Just like enabling your children or an alcoholic or somebody else does not create a better person in them. That's why this has to be this way. We are getting all of our safety nets removed,
Mhm.
and it's a sink or swim situation. You either figure it out and you choose differently, or you succumb to the cycle and you repeat. It is one or the other. That is the journey of now. And the quicker that you start to figure out, like, what can I untether from? What's the one thing right now that I can untether from? Is it a belief? Is it a person? Yes, it's going to challenge every survival instinct in you, but just know that you are in the driver's seat. And every time you untether from one thing, you get the stamina and the new wiring to untether from another thing. This is not a flip of a switch. You and I have been doing this for a number of years. So I'm hoping our audience is a little bit inspired by this. That's all we can do. That's all you and I can do as people who come on here, is tell our story, tell how it looks for us, tell the knowledge we feel we've gained, and promise people that it's going to suck. I promise you it's going to suck. It's not going to be easy. It's going to terrify you. You're always going to find new things that you have to untether from and make the choice on. But that's what real freedom is. So if you are a quote unquote freedom fighter and you're attached and tethered, you are not a free person. I don't care what political party you're associated with. If you're on the right and that's your be all, do all, end all, you are tethered. You aren't free. And if you're the same on the left, you are tethered. You're not free. Choose.
Yeah.
Choose.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
such a fun conversation, and I'm sure we'll be having more conversations, in the future on this topic, because it really is what we're seeing play out. We are seeing it play out. I mean, victimhood right in your face, everything telling you why you can't achieve a level of freedom in your life, or why, the systems are keeping you broke and poor. And we're seeing that right now with, even with Doge, all the ways we've been deceived as a people, oh, we got to, like, get the money back to the people because you've been taken advantage of. Okay. Yeah. And I still have the ability to make more money. Amazing. I still have a good life I've created in spite of all that's against me. I could completely get pissed off and, like, run with that and be upset about the injustices, or be like, all right, cool. Systems are collapsing, things are changing, and so I challenge you, if there's any area in your life you're feeling stuck, frustrated, that's your soul's little whisper to say, hey, like, let's change. That
Yeah.
something's not aligned here. What are you really wanting to do? And do it. I mean, anyways, we could go on for a while, but as always, let us know your thoughts on these topics, things you want to dive more into. And today, just take a chance to see where you're tethered. Kind of just look at what your choices are, how you're showing up, and where maybe you could be a little more aligned.
That's right. All right. Good luck, everyone. And until next time.
See ya.